Hello and welcome to the From Stands To Sidelines podcast, a podcast by coaches for coaches. Here we will discuss a range of topics from the sporting world, analysing the side that most people don't see, and hearing from some guests in the industry along the way. Hello and welcome back to the From Stands To Sidelines podcast with me, James, with Matt, with Keane, with Luke and Carl. We hope you enjoyed the last pod. Thank you very much for joining us again. And we have a new question today, which relates more to the professional side of the game. And our question today that we're going to discuss is, has data analysis made football too complex? So to start with for our debate, I think we need to analyse what is football. Now, most people, generally speaking, would say football is an art. And how would we define an art? Well, I had a go at it, and I defined art as a combination of science, maths, and creative human expression. And today, the debate we're going to look at determines whether we think data analysis has pushed us too far in the science and maths direction, and have we lost that human creative expression? Gentlemen, the floor is yours.
It's a really interesting point that you start with, actually. You don't tend to think of it like and add science and maths into football. When you think of football, you think creativity, flair on the pitch, stuff like that. You don't think of the numbers, the science behind, what goes into the game. But like you say, it's really interesting the way over the last few years it's evolved. I think it's really important that that we start looking into that a little bit more.
To be fair, I'm along the lines of it can seem that you see within the professional game, especially a team like Brentford, let's say, that are quite hot on what I would call the money ball. And for those that have seen the film, the money ball strategy, in the sense of they purely go on recruitment for players via obviously stats. Now, how much of that nowadays is now meaning that coaches don't actually have to be as good at people management as they used to be, because they can just go, right, well, I'm just going to go numbers, because it's the stats that guides them along. But yeah, so it is one of those ones that, from my point of view, I think it can be either. But I do think a lot of it is being taken out of managers' hands nowadays, because obviously a lot of it's transitioning to head coaches. I don't know how you guys feel about that.
Yeah, it's just, I think there was something to do in boxing, and I know it's a different sport, but you can look at your opponent as much as you like. It still comes down to what you do, and I think that's coming out of football a little bit. It's more, how do we counter our opponent than showing their strengths and weaknesses. Then this is how they play. Right, now we focus on us. How do we go about our business to beat them? I think it's kind of going away from it comes from us beating them, rather than it's more how do we counter their strengths.
Do you know what though, Matt? It's interesting you say that, because you look at the Euros games, and specifically the England-Switzerland game. And I know I said it to you boys at the time. I said, if we now go and change formation, I think this is really going to hurt Switzerland. And we saw that. I'm not saying Switzerland didn't play well, but we almost see them sort of go within themselves a little bit more than they have in previous games against Germany and Italy, where they come out and they set up how they expected to, and we come out and set up a little bit differently. And I think that would have been down to, yes, a lot of outside noise, but a lot to do with opposition analysis and, right, how can we get the better of this Swiss team? Because, the numbers that they were putting up in terms of the amount of ball, the ball that they were having throughout games, especially in the Italy game, the amount of shots that they were having on goal, and the output of their wingers, that Ndoye and Vargas, the numbers output that they were putting out in those games were probably the best in the tournament in terms of the wingers. But it was interesting how we then adapted our game to really counter what we would have seen had we probably kept our 4-2-3-1. But yeah, no, like Matt says, you see it now used for a lot of opposition analysis and stuff like that, and it's it's really interesting.
But I'll add to that, Kane, just because the Swiss manager would have watched England, whatever, and thought, right, 4-2-3-1, that's how they'll line up. So when we step out as a free back, that's when, instead of focusing, because all week he probably focused on how do we counter England, they set up as this is how we'll go about it. When you change formation, it'll probably just caught them off guard, and they were like, well, now what? Because we've sorted out all of this rather than how we play. We've kind of gone the way of how do we counter them instead of, right, this is how they play. No matter what, they won't go long or something. They always try and keep it no matter how they play.
Where do you draw a line, though? Where do you go? Where do you stop playing your game and start thinking, like, it's fine saying you just counter teams, but if it doesn't match your philosophy, if, for example, you've got a team that hype and your way forward is to try the long ball over the top through, but you've built your philosophy, and especially for us as working in academies and sets and things like that, it's the philosophy is built into that club that you work at, and that club philosophy might be to play out from the back. But what if it doesn't fit? At what point do you draw a line?
I think that depends a lot on the manager. And generally speaking, the first team, I think it depends on the manager. The example I would like to use is Marcelo Bielsa at Leeds. Now, at the start, they were a team of high pressing. It was very attacking. It was very gung-ho. It was all out. It was constant. It was a barrage of runs and pressing and all this, that, and the other. And people loved it at first. People thought it was fantastic because it worked, because it was unexpected. And I think that's where we sort of mention about unexpectedness. When you analyse an opposition and then they do something completely different, it throws you off 100% in your preparation. You get confused. But when people started to pick up on it and it became noticeable and it became predictable and you could combat it, and teams did combat it, and Leeds started to struggle, I think that's when you have to look at something as a manager and go, well, am I going to be, I call it tactical stubbornness. Am I going to be stubborn? Am I going to stick with it? Or am I going to try and be dynamic, and am I going to try and adapt the system I use, adapt my style? Because I think sometimes Leeds were getting a lot of praise for something that maybe shot themselves in the foot. Everyone loved the fact that, oh, well, Leeds are going to go and play against Man City the same way they'd play against, a relegation side. And I think, well, that's great, and that's a great mental attitude. But is it sensible? Does it make sense? Because they lost the game. You're playing a game that is borderline suicidal, and I think you see that with a manager. And it's a good question, Luke. Where do you draw that line? I think every individual manager, I think it's based on their own stubbornness. And obviously you've got people around you, but if I truly believe that that's the way it's going to work, I would stick with it. But if you've got one person telling you one thing, one person you telling the other, it's a really individual thing about where do you draw that line. But if you set up to counter someone and then they set up to counter you, if you've got two teams setting up to counter each other, then who knows what anyone's playing? Nobody's playing a game at all. They're both playing against something that doesn't exist. If I play a 4-2-3-1 generally, and Luke, you take your team out and you try and counter that, and then you counter that with a different formation than usual, and I try and counter your regular formation, say you play a 3-5-2, I try and counter that, and we're both playing different formations, both playing different styles, then no one's playing against anyone. You don't know your enemy. You can't predict these things. I mean, I'm sure they can predict them to some degree, but at the end of the day, that's all it takes, is that little shift and that bold decision from a manager and from a staff to just say, well, no, we're going to change today, and we're going to surprise them. And it's a tactic that sort of people have used, not just in football, not just in sport, in the army, things like that. Historically, in battles, if you're just taken by surprise, sometimes it's enough.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's probably where the likes of Brentford and Brighton have actually gone wrong this season. I think the season before, and potentially for Brighton even the season before that, you look at Graham Potter, who how well did he do with that Brighton team? That year they started off looking at statistics, looking at data, and using that to try and counter their opposition, and using that to scout and bring in players from abroad. And, it worked wonders. And we was looking at Brighton for the last, or for them 2 seasons, the season under Graham Potter, and then the first season under Roberto De Zerbi, in which they made Europe. And we're looking at them thinking, like, they're genius. They're absolute genius. But, you see the difference when Graham Potter goes to Chelsea and things don't quite work out for him. He's got better players. He's got more resources. He's got better facilities. It doesn't always work out. And then you have De Zerbi's first season at Brighton, fantastic, absolutely brilliant. And, he was always going to find it hard to top it that second season. But, it's still a massive success finishing where they did, don't get me wrong. But at the end of the day, they've gone backwards, not forwards. And you're looking at data and you're going, well, if we're going off database and stuff like that, you're going to hope that data takes you forward. And it might do in the long run, but in the short run, it doesn't always work. And I think that's where sometimes you've got to get that balance of having the data as well as the knowledge and just that human knowledge amongst the group to really try and balance it out over that short period of time, rather than just going 110% for each of those options.
The difference, though, the person like James mentioned, Bielsa, and you mentioned Potter, your kind of flip side would be your Guardiola. Now, I watched recently the Guardiola documentary on BBC. I thought it was brilliant, quite interesting. And I forgot about this, but it suddenly reminded me. His first year at Man City, I don't think they actually won anything.
No, they didn't.
I remember, and they showed it, and I suddenly remembered it. Was everyone was going, "Nah, he's having a laugh. He's trying to play this tiki-taka football. It's ridiculous. Like it's not going to work in this league. You're in the English league now, mate. You got to change your style, or that's it. You got to go." And all these Man City fans are calling for Pep Guardiola to go within the first year because he didn't win anything, and they thought it was this tiki-taka football. And then I remember him being in an interview. They showed the interview, and I think one of the press was like, "Are you going to change your style now?" And he was just like, "No, I've won Champions Leagues, I've won league titles. No, I'm not changing my style." And look where they are now.
Yeah.
Someone that's stuck to, and I know it's not identical each year or each game, but how often have they been beaten and they've played the same philosophy, the same style throughout?
But does that rely then? That's the question I would ask is, well, that's okay because they're Man City. They've got the stars. They've got the right quality. When Leeds did it, it didn't work. Is it down to your quality, your squad? Is it down to the belief in the squad? That's the word I always go back to. My favourite word is believe. And I think you mentioned Pep there. Absolutely, in the face of criticism, wasn't going to change. Wasn't going to change because he believed in himself. And I think that's one thing I found from the documentary as well, was that he is constantly sort of instilling a belief into his players. You see him in training, he's all enthusiastic, exuberant, and he's shouting at them, but with praise constantly, telling them how good they are, why we won the league because you're here, things like that. And it's like, well, is it just because they're more talented players and they've got the ability to do it, or is it because they believe? Because if they believe and he believes, then it can work. So for me, the question I would ask is, well, does stubbornness only work if you have that quality to be successful, or can belief mix with quality? Because let's be honest, any professional footballer, especially in the Premier League, any professional team has an insane amount of ability. I think people neglect that. People say they're not good enough, but all these footballers are fantastic, absolutely fantastic, and they all have an ability. But is it belief that takes you further? Is it just a belief, or is it the ability? That's the question I would ask.
I'd love to know how much, and I'm not saying they don't do any, but I'd love to know the difference in analysis between a Man City and, for example, this coming season, Ipswich. Like, do which have to put that much more work and that much more detail into their analysis because they don't have necessarily the same quality compared to a Man City who can be a bit more reliant on that quality on the ball. I'd love to know what the difference is.
When do you start to like over-analyze a team? So I know we've talked about like the way we play and whatever, but when do you start just like, oh, this is the combination they play, this is the little things they do? When do you start to, like, if we're playing Man City, for example, they can kill us all over the pitch. Doesn't matter if it's centre half or striker. But at what point do you just go, this is the way they play and whatever? Because I know managers sometimes are like really into it, and then they do something even a little bit different, like Man City, for example, do something a little bit different to catch them off guard and they go and score. So when do you start to over-analyze the game?
This is based on patterns, though, isn't it? It's based on things that are consistent. And sometimes that can be misleading, though. Because if you look, for example, like a most recent example, England, and you look at that XG score, it's like 0.6 or something. And you go,
the best,
really...
some of the best players in the world. That like Harry Kane scored like 20 something league goals in Bundesliga in like 20 games or something.
And you're telling me that squad won't score goals?
Exactly.
But doesn't that hamper like decision making though, in the sense of like if the decision's being taken away because it's based off like data, especially as us coaches, if we see that, especially some more data driven, quantitative data sort of coaches, for better of the word, how much of it does trickle down, and it's all good having things like Opt on Twitter, absolutely brilliant seeing that, but how much does that as coaches, and let's kind of see how it kind of filters down, that within potential grassroots a coach sees something and yet they realise that, oh, well, if he's at a certain place and it's lower XG, he shouldn't shoot. But then he's telling his players not to shoot from there, when actually it might be a case of like when you're thinking about the development of players and also within academies, how much do we kind of just say, don't worry about the data, just make it purely on the decision making, on randomness? Because this is where I sit on it. Sometimes in a day, players are the people on the pitch. As managers and coaches, we have a responsibility to obviously set them up into a system or a way that is going to get the best out of them. I'm not disputing that. But how much of it is a case of you have to compromise on quite a few things and actually go, let the players do the feeling? Because at the end of the day, they're the ones on the pitch at the time. And to be fair, just like most things, it's a trial and error. You know, we can all go do different exams at different places, or the same exam at different places, but there's always going to be variables somewhere. So when it comes to data, I can be a bit on the fence, but I'm also conscious that like it can affect all decision making, and how much do you allow it to be feel or not. So this is my question for you guys, like as coaches within an academy environment or below, how much would you actually listen to data? So if you went to the professional game now, would you say you would have more focus on the data, or would you do more on feel, or what would you do, or would you have a bit of both? What's your thoughts?
Massively 50-50 for me, I think, because it goes hand in hand. You look at the data, you then have to work out how you're going to counter that. You know, it comes back to what James was talking about earlier about going out with two different formations. Once you go out like that, you know, you're going to have to adapt your game and stuff like that. But I think if you're going to look at the data, you're going to have to come up with a plan A, you're going to have to come up with a plan B, because like you say, it's not going to go, not everything is going to go exactly how it's, you know, how it might look or how it feels. You know, there's going to be so many variables in different scenarios and in different situations where you're going to have to adapt. That might be small moments in a game. That might be, you know, for example, if you're 1-0 up in an important game towards the end, last 5-10 minutes or so, and you know the other team decide they're going to put their their striker or their centre back up top because he's 6'6" and can win every header on the pitch, and you've got tiny centre backs, you're Man United and you've got Alessandro Martinez at centre back, at what point do you go, right, we're going to have to change it up here? You know, you see it with the Netherlands game when we played the Netherlands the other night, when they chucked 2 strikers on after our goal, and we had to go and chuck 2 strikers back on, 2 defenders on. So many variables that change throughout a game where you've got to be prepared for every scenario. So what I'd say is I'd look at, you know, I'd look at it in stages personally. I'd go, right, first half an hour, that's what they tend to do. They've scored this many goals from these types of scenarios in the first 30 minutes, middle 30 minutes, last 30 minutes, and go, right, there's a plan A and a plan B for if things go our way or don't go our way, and stuff like that. I think there's so much preparation you've got to do, but at the end of the day, you have to be prepared to the minute detail to be able to be successful. And especially if you're a Brighton or an Ipswich, for example, that have got to play Liverpool and Man City in their first game, they've got to be so prepared to the minute detail compared to Pep or Arne Slot, which are going to be going into the game against a newly promoted team and are going to be looking at that going, there's our chance to get a good 3 points on the board, a 5-0 win. And Ipswich are going to be going, right, do we shut up shop? Do we go for an early goal and see how we go? You know, it could go so many ways, but you know, it's scenarios, isn't it, at the end of the day, and you've got to be prepared for the minute details.
I go more based on or improving my players, especially developing players. I think such an underrated skill is that decision making. If you've got players that, like, say you've come up with your plan and you've noticed that, you know, they struggle with crosses, and so you go, right, in our game, we're going to put crosses in. As many crosses as we can from wide areas, we're going to put them in the box. And then all of a sudden, how do you know that whoever it is haven't spent the whole, I don't know, say you've got a 2-week break, haven't spent the whole 2 weeks working on defending crosses. And suddenly everything that you come up with is now like, that's not great. You've told your players to go out there and put crosses in. It's very difficult from the side to change that while the game's going on. You can't wait till half time. You've got to get it done. So I think having players and improving that decision making with your players for them to actually realise it themselves when they're on the pitch and go, hold on a minute, boys, crosses aren't working. Let's take them on. Let's dribble forwards. Let's get it, you know, let's play it on the floor. Let's try something different. But if you've got players that are stuck by one kind of set rule, you find that they struggle. And you see it with teams that have a philosophy or have like a set routine of how they will score, where they will score. They struggle because there's no one there going, whoa, wait, this doesn't work. Let's try something different and try something else and risk a few things. So I'm not saying neglect data completely, because I think there's been scenarios that you look at, like, for example, if you got old Arsenal team, you see Pierre Mertesacker in defence. You know you can't cross the ball, he's probably going to head it away. But in a foot race, you got a decent chance, and that's where I think the data would be the most useful, is recognising, right, how many do they block shots, how many 1v1s have they won, things like that can inform your players of what they should be trying on different areas of the pitch. But I do think I would focus more on improvement of that decision making, 100%.
Just going on to academy stuff, because I was talking to someone the other day. They were in West Ham's academy as a goalie. Well, it was a good few years ago, about 5-6 years ago, and they were saying they had a camera above their head like that, like a sky camera looking down, like tracking their every step, so how they shuffled across, and then they'd go through it literally step by step and say, right, this is how you. I just think, like, at a young age in the academy, like, step by step is a bit like for a player at that age, going, there's a camera above me and after this, they're all going to look at it and see, oh, my foot might be one step to the right too much or whatever. I think going back to before about over analysing, I think times like that when you're literally looking at a player or a goalie, for example, step by step to see how they're doing stuff is a bit over the top.
I think that's what you sort of mentioned there is about we go back to our main question today is, has it made football too complex? Well, I think that is a prime example of just overcomplicating things. You know, if you're thinking too much, if you're standing there in between the sticks as a goalie and you're thinking about your foot movement and you're not giving your full attention to what's happening in front of you, and I think that's where you've overcomplicated it. And I think for me the sort of two sides of the scale when it comes to data and decision making is your data informing your decisions or is it controlling them? And I think anything over 50% and it controls your decision as opposed to inform it. And I think the idea when we brought in data science into football was to inform decisions and to help people understand the game better. And it's, for me, I think it's about supporting what you see. It should be first what you see and then do the statistics back that up. Or if you're getting something completely different in terms of stats to what you see. So if I see on the pitch, I think you keep possession, and then I look at the possession stats after the game, and you know you have 20%. Well, where is the break in the chain? However, have I just got that wrong, or is there something underlying? And I think you need to sort of see tactically, football is like a game of chess to me. As two managers, you know, you've got all your pieces out there on the pitch, and you have to play your game. And in chess, you'd play your game, you play your strategy, you pick it and you go with it, and you don't defer from it straight away. And if you feel slightly threatened, you don't just back away into a corner. But you have to keep an eye on your opposition too. You have to respond to people's actions. So if an opponent does something, if the opposition manager makes a change, for example, or sets them out in a certain way, you have to appreciate that, acknowledge that, and maybe respond to that. But you've got to weigh up the pros and cons of, well, if I change, what's the benefit in comparison to playing my strategy still? And I think we look at you mentioned, Keane, particularly people throwing subs on, you know, towards the end of a game. I look at end game scenarios, particularly in knockout football, and everyone's got a plan and everyone plays really well and everyone sticks to their game plan until you get to 80th minute of a game, 85th minute of a game, 90th minute of a game sometimes, and it all just goes completely crazy. Now, for me, I don't like that. I've watched enough football where I've seen teams go crazy and completely change what they do, and they just throw everyone in the box and they try and lump it up, and it doesn't work. I mean, it works sometimes, and when it works, you see it all over the television, you see it all over the newspapers because it's the big last gasp winner, last gasp equaliser, the goalie scored an overhead kick in the box, something crazy like that. But for me, it doesn't work. You know, that's one time out of 100, and I see my local team, Basingstoke Town, I see them, and you know, we might be 1-0 down, or we might be a 2-2 draw and we need a win, something like that. And we've played really well all game. And we've created chances by playing our football, by playing it on the floor, by playing sensible, by getting it out to the wings and playing it through and running in behind. Love it. Fantastic. And we create chances. You might not score them all, but that's a separate issue. If you're creating chances, that's fine. And they're good quality chances. And then you get to the last 5 minutes, everyone panics. The goalie's then got the ball on the halfway line and they're floating one in to everyone in the box. Your centre halves are in the box and you don't score and you don't create the same quality of chances because you change. And I think that's where it's about bravery. You know, we're going to mention them so many times, I think, is Man City. They are so patient and so trusting in the way they play. Now you'll see that I remember a game against Norwich, so 1-0 down, and they didn't change. They didn't change at all. You have to, if you believe, you have to stick with it. It was the last 5 minutes of a game. They're losing. They don't change. They don't start lumping it in the box. They don't start trying to force it. They're patient. Yeah, but they're patient. They're so patient, and they play it around. They play it around. They play it around. And just when you get a bit nervous as their opposition, and you commit, you overcommit, you go to press the ball, and you should be sitting back. That gap opens up, and boom, straight away they make that pass, and then it all just falls into place for Man City. And I think that is why, for me, they have been champions, because champions are consistent, and that it's not just about being the best team, it's about being consistent. And for me, I think that is why they've shown like such amazing stature in terms of Premier League teams throughout history. They just don't divert, and it's late game. They're not in a favourable situation, but they trust in themselves. They trust in the way they play, and they stick at it. And I think that is so important. But then I go back to my tactical stubbornness. Well, they don't change. Maybe they should change, but if you believe in it, maybe just let it ride. You know what I mean? It's an interesting thing to think about, definitely.
I was just gonna say, you mentioned about later on in the games and stuff like that. There's a couple players, you look at Füllkrug for Germany, who's made, what was it, 7 appearances, and he's come off the bench 7 times and scored 4 goals. And the same with Weghorst as well, tends to come off the bench and score. At what point do you let that influence your decision when you see him standing on the sideline ready to come on? Do you think maybe, right, now's the time I might need to drag, let's say they're playing England, might need to drag Walker off, who's a right back by trade, and is someone that's going to naturally look to drift wide and get into forward positions, and bring someone on like Konza or Gomez? At what point do you let that divert you from what you're already doing, and bring in someone that's maybe gonna do a different job or change up the role a little bit?
I think it depends on a game in a way, because, well, like we saw with England, when they brought on Weghorst, we were still kind of dominating the game. We were still having majority of possession. We're still doing our game. So I think it just depends on the game, really. And
I think that the nature of the threat as well is different, and
yeah,
you've got to understand that it's not just about, well, this player comes on, they scores goals. What is their particular threat? What do they do? And I think I go back to a long time. Well, it feels a long time ago now. And the Lionesses, when Alessia Russo kept coming on and scoring off the bench every single game, she would come off the bench and she would score. Yet people wouldn't defend her. When she came on, teams weren't ready to mark her out of the game. And you knew exactly what she was going to do. And we all knew, sitting at home, you could sit there and watch, and you all know what she was going to do when she came off the bench.
Yeah.
Like, teams wouldn't respond. You see her getting warmed up, you see her come on, and they didn't respond. And that, I think that's the reason we won the Euros, really, is because of things like that.
People say, I think if you read that Serena Wiegman book, really, really interesting, Louis van Gaal as well also says it, is that Serena always had a backup plan for everything. I said, she says in it as well, when James got that red card, she didn't tell anyone. She said, because she didn't want to jinx it, she didn't want to give him a red card. But she had a plan for if they went down to 10 men, what would they do? If they went down a goal against whoever, what would they do? Like, they had that plan in place, and she's just really prepared for it. And that's just a great example, and that's probably what others should have. And like you said, it's probably why we won the tournament. It's because no one else was thinking. If you're a coach, you should be thinking, right, hold on, Risho's come on each of these games and scored a goal. So what if she comes on against us? Just a what if. And then having that in place would be something that she comes on, all the team know, right, this is what we do now. Change it slightly. You move into centre back if you got a faster player. I think it's having those backups based on maybe that analysis and data is quite good. But I really like your point about control. Does it control what you do or inform what you do? And for me, it's inform. 100% it's inform.
Yeah, it has to be. Yeah, no, it has to be informed, because if you go too much on data, that that informative mindset and that knowledge and that human decision making all of a sudden goes out the window if you rely too much on it. But I do genuinely think you do have to have those data set in place, so that you do know and you are prepared for scenarios that may go on. To be fair, I'd like to change the topic slightly and talk about how it affects recruitment because I genuinely think, in terms of recruitment, data analysis has got to be one of the best things for that. It has to be. We spoke about it earlier in terms of, Brighton identifying certain targets. Do they fit the role? Yes. Do they fit the squad? Yes. Have they got the stats to back it up? Yes. They've got a 1 down to a 5. They will. They'll have at least 5 options for a position of a signing that they're going to go and make, I think. But we've seen it work so many times with Brighton, and you're seeing it now work with, or filter down the pyramid. I think now we're seeing it start to filter down the pyramid. You look at my team, Millwall, right? We've gone and signed a goalkeeper in Lucas Jensen, right? And I can see you all smiling now because I thought Millwall will into this, but it's so relevant
See
because
Wickham soon.
we're not used to having this as Millwall fans, right? And seeing us go in and sign these players from lower leagues that statistically have been superb. We've signed Macaulay Langstaff from League Two. For me, a finisher is a finisher. All right. If you can create chances for someone that can score goals and knows how to score goals, they can cut that at any level. You put Macaulay Langstaff into a Man City team, doesn't do as well as Haaland, but he's going to get you 15 to 20 goals a year just because he knows to be in the right place at the right time and score. And, his finishing ability is superb. We've signed a goalkeeper from Lincoln, Lucas Jensen, who had a percentage of 77 point something percent and was by a mile the best in League One last year. And that's the point. We're seeing it now filter through the leagues, in which the lower league clubs are now starting to look at data and pick up players based on this data. And, it might not work out for these players at Millwall, but the point is, it's filtering down the leagues because we're seeing it work out for clubs like Brentford and Brighton and clubs that are using this data.
Opposing argument then. So Alexis Sanchez, Arsenal to Man United, was a bit of a downhill.
Or even Eden Hazard.
Hazard, potentially, yeah. You also got people like, you could say Donny van der Beek, although he didn't get a lot of opportunities to show what he could do. He would be one you could say that, okay, maybe didn't go quite as well. Pepe going to Arsenal, that was a big deal. He was going to be the next massive superstar. Didn't see much from him, and it makes you think back to what I said earlier about these lower clubs having to do a lot more and actually being potentially more efficient than some of these bigger clubs. Actually, they have to consider more and think about, they can't take as much risks, because an Arsenal or a Man City or someone can go, yeah, we'll throw this much money at a player that we think is going to be really good for us, and if he doesn't, then it's not too much of a deal.
But what I would say to that is that not more of a risk? Because your Nicolas Pepe, for example, what did they pay for him? 60 odd million? I think they sold him for 15,
70,
didn't
yeah.
they?
72 million euros.
So you're looking at 72 minus 15. I'm not great at maths, but it's about a 50 million pound loss. We've picked up these two players on free contracts. So would you say that paying 72 million is a far bigger risk than picking up these free transfers based on data?
Yeah. But the thing is, what I mean by it is that quality of data. What are all these clubs looking at differently? Are they looking at the same database? Are they got different people looking at different parts? And who's actually considering how they fit into the team? Because some of them are quite possibly going, right, this player's really good. He's scoring goals. He's got assists. He's got this. But how much of them actually are using their eyes rather than the data and going, right, well, he's actually scoring goals because he's in these positions and these positions. We don't do that. That's not our formation. That's not how we play. And I wonder how many of them are actually. And I've never been in a professional club. I would have no idea. But it makes you think, like, someone at Brighton or even like you consider, was it at Southampton? We had that guy from Southampton. Was it Les?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Les Reed.
yeah, Les Reed, yeah.
Southampton, and yeah, they were exactly the same as a Brighton are now. They used to bring in these players that everyone would go, who? Like, who are they? Where have they come from? What's this? And then all of a sudden, it's like, wow, he's like a Pele scoring loads of goals. And you're like, what? How do they know? How do they know who they should be bringing in? And it's the same with Brighton at the moment. So what are they taking from this?
Is it a
Yeah,
case
go
of
on.
with that? I just want to go back to Luke's point there of players being signed who fit the bill on paper with numbers but don't fit the team. Now, an example I would give is West Ham, and the way I would look at it is when board members and chairmen and owners go and buy players without a manager's wishes. And so that's where I think that comes into it, is a case of, well, when you've got, an overexcited chairman or an overexcited owner that wants to be a bit more hands-on than maybe they should be. I think that's a debate for another day. But I think when you get that, you get players bought based solely on numbers, and they just don't fit the team, or they might not be what the manager wants. And I think one of the players I would go to is Danny Ings. Now, Danny Ings got signed for West Ham, and his numbers at Aston Villa were fantastic. I think he performed very well for them in the situation he was in.
And I
And
think
then,
he might have been signed as well by. Would Les Reed have been involved in that signing at Southampton?
Yes,
quite
he was
potentially,
Might have been.
actually.
yeah, quite potentially. And
It was
it's
the same time Ricky Lambert came through as well.
yeah, and you go to it and you look, well, numbers wise, he looked like a great fit, because you go, well, he can score goals, and that's what they need. Well, you get him in that team, and he didn't play the same style. He wasn't the player they needed. They needed a Michael Antonio, and he wasn't that.
Yeah.
And he wasn't that. And Antonio had his hamstrings made of elastic bands, and he was out all the time. And so you look to Danny Ings. He should be your man to step up. Your big signing, your striker, he should be stepping up. But he just didn't fit into the team. Whenever I watch West Ham play with Danny Ings, I always felt that he just couldn't get into any game. Even if he started the game, he just couldn't get into it because he wasn't that sort of player. And that's where I think you go, well, data has been, because some chairmen and some boards run clubs as data run clubs, like your Brentfords and your Brightons. They are data run clubs. They are data driven. But then if you get too much influence from that data, and it's solely, we spoke control versus inform. If they're controlling their recruitment just the same as they're controlling their on-pitch decisions, well, maybe then you've got a situation where that data's gone too far and you've lost touch from football. You can, because we can all sit on a screen and look at all the details, and we can watch videos, but you're quite distant from being out on the grass and being in the dressing room with the squad. I think it's very distanced from football itself, and that's the danger of data, is that sometimes you divert such a long way away from football that you forget what the essence of football is. And Keane, something you sort of alluded to earlier, is it's a human game. You can't, it's not a science, and you can't ever make it 100% a science, because it's humans. And in our nature as humans, there's randomness, there's variability, there's personal choice, there's a lot of different things that go into it. And you can put it down to different sciences like your psychologies, your biologies, lots of different things like that. But you can never make it 100% a science, because it just has that human nature of variability in there. And I think that is where you cannot go and have data control you, whether that be on pitch or whether that be recruitment. And I think it's really interesting that you mentioned the recruitment, because there's so many teams that do it now, and it has worked so many times. But sometimes it doesn't work, and that's what we mentioned as well. Sometimes you sign a player and it just doesn't work, and it might not be the chairman or the board members signing them, and it might not be they're a bad fit for the team, but sometimes it just goes wrong. But that's the nature of, well, we're making informed decisions. They're not guaranteed. Nothing's guaranteed. It's an informed decision. So I think it's really, really interesting. But then you get a lot of frustration, I think, with the teams that are data driven as a club, when they buy players on the cheap based on their data. They play them and they play fantastically. Brighton are a great example. They play them and they are world beaters in the Premier League. They're world beaters, and then they sell them on straight away to make the money, and they take their profit and they go again. Now, as a football fan, that's frustrating. And I can understand as a Brighton fan, if I was a Brighton fan, I think I'd be frustrated by that. You know, you've got to place some emphasis on keeping players who are good enough for your team, not just taking the money from them. But
Almost
they're a data-driven club.
with a loan player, it's now never fall in love with a Brighton player. It's just a bit
Absolutely.
like, no,
Absolutely. Yeah, if they're any good, they'll be gone by the end of next year. And I think, and even a manager, and it's the sake of, well, how do we define success? Because I think as a football fan, you define success differently to a lot of the people that run the football clubs.
I was going to say about recruitment, because I know a lot of teams nowadays are going purely on stats and maybe trying to save time in actually watching the player, but the stats don't show you how they are off the ball. The stats don't show you how they react to situations and stuff like that. So I think it's all good having the stats for like past success, right? If you're a possession team or whatever, but it doesn't show you. They could lose the ball and start getting annoyed, or they could be 1-0 down and give up. The stats
But
don't
can't see
show you that, though.
attitude, can
I
you? You
think-
can't see an
Yeah.
attitude.
You can
Yeah,
never
I
put
think
stats
that's
on mentality
where
at the end of the day.
I think that's where informative decisions do come
Yeah.
into play, and I'm not disputing that they don't, because you know, there will be certain signings where someone will go, right, we'll sign this player based on data. That happens. That does happen. Like that is a fact. It does happen. But I think on the rare occasion that happens, I do genuinely believe that these decisions that do get made, however, like, you know, you're Brighton, for example, pulling out Mitoma and that Valentin Barco and players like that from all around the world, they'll have people there watching. They'll have people there making informative decisions, looking at the way they play, looking at their behaviours off the ball, on the ball, or whether they get bought off as they're coming onto the pitch. Their behaviours around the place will be monitored as they're leaving to get on the bus, as they're getting off the bus to get into the stadium. All of these things will be taken into consideration when signing a player. Like that is the fact. But like, you know, it is, I think, can be in some scenarios driven by the data. They might look at the data and go, right, this is the data. It's there to back up that they are one of the best statistic based players in the league. Right now, let's go and have a look at them, rather than having it the other way round and going, let's have a look at them, and then going, right, have they got the database to go and back it up?
Absolutely. I think
Yeah.
it's interesting, Keane, because I think that is, you've hit the nail on the head of how data should be used in recruitment. Now, you know, you spoke earlier and you said it's moving its way down the pyramid. It absolutely definitely is. But I don't think when you spoke about it, you appreciated, and I think we should appreciate now, just how far it's going now. You know, it's non-league. It's non-league
Yeah,
football.
absolutely.
And there's plenty of services online now where players post their highlights, clubs post their highlights, and you can see enough about a non-league player now. And I think that is when we have to look and think, okay, well, how is it used practically? Because a non-league club can't afford to go and have a scout here, there, and everywhere. But if I go on data and I go on videos and I go, okay, well, this player's good, now I'll send someone to go and look. That's where it's best used. And I think that is not just non-league, that's all the way up, because no one can afford to watch every game of football ever. No club can afford that, not even Man City. And I think that's where we use it best. As a recruiter, you go, well, based on numbers and based on what we think this person is good and will fit into the team, as Luke said. So you have to look at both of those things. And then you go and you look and you find the human side. And that's where we mix the data and the science and the maths with the human side and the human expression. I think that you have to go and you have to look, you observe them in training. You say you just watch the human behind the numbers. And I think that is where we use data best as a recruiter, is it guides you to go and do your job as a human. And I think that, you know, that is definitely filtering a long way down the pyramid now, which is really good to see. I think sometimes maybe it can cloud your judgment as a recruiter, especially when you see all these fancy technologies. And the thing with the highlights reel is, you know, no one posts when they get it wrong. And I could look like the best player in the world if I posted highlights. Don't pull that face, Matt. Don't pull that face. But but honestly, if you post a highlight reel, you know, you can make something look as if you want it to. But I think that's where you have to go in and you see the good, bad, and the ugly. And so it's really important. Now, I just want to change our conversation again to something where I think maybe a discussion could be had. Is data and data science on the field more useful in those closed situations where there's less outside influence, i.e. a dead ball scenario like a penalty or a free kick or a corner? Because I think that's where we see a lot more of a data sort of usage now, is in those dead ball scenarios with the free kicks and particularly the penalties. And I think the first example I'll start us off with an example, is Jordan Pickford in the penalty shootout. You see the water bottle. He's studied it. His analysts have studied it. The goalkeeping coaches have studied it, and he's got a list of what he's going to do. You know, he's got dive left or stand, wait, and he knows based on what to do. And I saw the list and I went through the penalties again. And if he'd have followed his list exactly, he would have saved 2 of those penalties. Now he saved 1, and it was a correct prediction on the bottle. But had he followed all 5 of those predictions, he would have saved 2. And I think that is where data is huge, because you can understand how a player is going to act and combat that. And that's where we talk about, well, I'm not going to change my game necessarily, but I'm going to respond to what you're going to do. And I think Tim Krul, another fantastic example. I hate to say it, but it was a penalty shootout between Norwich and Spurs, and he had his water bottle. It wasn't as clean looking as Jordan Pickford's bottle. I think it was a bit of kitchen roll with a marker pen, but it was accurate, and he saved the penalties. And that's where I think data is useful, because it's the predictable things. Football in open play is unpredictable. It's totally unpredictable because there's too many variables. No 2 things are the same. No 2 scenarios are the same. When you get a dead ball scenario, only so much can happen. And that's where I think, is data more useful there? And I'd like somebody else to comment.
Going penalties, I don't think what Jordan Pickford's got, and this is me personally, I don't think what Jordan Pickford's got in his bottle, and it helps a lot. It helps a bit, I think, because, like, you know, if you've got people that do take penalties to the right majority of the time, you know, you're probably right. But I still don't think it takes away from the 50-50 of a penalty shootout, because they have the same. This is what I think we might be slightly overlooking, and what other people overlook as well. Is there any data that you've got, others have got it too.
Mm.
So if I'm a coach for the penalty shootout, I'm going to be going to my players and going, look, mate, you've got all the penalties you've taken. Every single one you've done's gone to the right. So I want you to put one to the left. Now, it doesn't make a difference whether that keeper's got on his bottle dive right, because you're now going left. Like, he could decide to change it that one time. You know, he could screw it up and it goes down the middle. You know, you could still dive the right way. And I think it was Kev's bit of advice that we've had before, which was really, really simple, but actually really, really useful in terms of penalties. Hit the ball hard. Yeah.
Lever it.
That distance, no keeper can react quickly.
Reasonably save it, yeah. And but did you see the
data
bottle?
to have if you have that.
Yeah, but did you see the bottle? Did you see the Jordan Pickford bottle? Because it wasn't a case of left, right, left, right, left, right. It wasn't that.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it was smart. It was about how they took, not necessarily where they put their penalties, but how they took them, how they approached them. And that was where he was, okay, well, this player's going to wait for me to react. So his bottle said, stand, wait, then dive. And that was where I thought it was more interesting than your bog standard left, right. Because it used to be, and I think when Tim Krul had it, a lot of them just said left, right, centre, because that was based on where he thought they were going to go. But then you've obviously got to respond. And you make a great point that, you know, if you're expecting me to do one thing, I'm just going to do the other. I'm just going to bluff you and I'm going to do the other. Or I might double bluff you and go back the other way.
Almost being a chicken.
I will. You're in a stadium, right? 70,000. You're at Wembley. 90,000 people. 45k screaming at you. 45k in tears because you're trying to score. You've put 6 penalties on your right. You've got 45 people, 1,000 people behind that goal, waving their arm, booing, and your manager's told you to go left. But pressure. If I've put 6 penalties to the right, I'm not going to go, oh no, I have to pull it to the left. I'm going to go.
Especially,
pressure is human. It's human, and that's what we say. Human is the only thing that can skew the data.
Exactly.
Is that human choice and the human pressure.
The thing,
Which, to be
the only thing is, sorry boys. I just want to say it while it's on my mind. The only thing is that human choices get added to data. That is the only thing. Human choices do become data, and that's the only thing that I would say in that scenario. Because then it's like, well, you look back at the data and you go, right, you break it down and you go, right, well, it might be a little bit inconsistent, and it might some of it might be consistent, but it ultimately it comes down to human choices. I think whether that's a possession-based team having a certain amount of possession, it's the human choice of that manager that has adopted that play style, that philosophy. And then you look at maybe like what Matt's just said, you know, if you've gone 6 times to the right and then all of a sudden you go to the left, and it's maybe the 6 times that you've gone to the right, you had your own fans behind the goal. Yet the 6th time or the 7th time you go to the left, you got the opposition behind the goal. It's human choice. And you know, like I said at the start of that, it's ultimately human choice becomes data.
To be fair,
Yeah.
you say that, and like one key thing that comes to mind is like data will never come into account variables of the situation. Like people like Marcus Rashford, Jadon Sancho, Bukayo Saka after the last Euro, so back 2021. Like on the scheme of it, right? All of them had good penalty records. That's the reason why they got chosen to take it. But there's nothing to say, as you said, the variables, not being funny. England's first final for 50 plus years, you know, just come out of a pandemic. Like the pressure on them was immense from fans, the media, especially kind of everything that had gone on previously. But like, as you said, a lot of it is human choice. So I absolutely echo that. But then you look at what happens afterwards, and this is the thing, data is good to a certain point. Because like I guarantee afterwards you saw all of them take penalties. I don't think Jadon Sancho has taken a penalty since within a game. He hasn't really had much chance at Man United since. Obviously since he's been booted out. But then obviously you look at Rashford and you look at Bukayo Saka. Like Saka took one obviously in the Switzerland game, scored. But you look at those times afterwards, and as a goalkeeper, how much does the goalkeeper kind of rely on the feel of it, in the sense of you kind of almost hope that if he gets a penalty, you get it towards the end of those games. Whereas data won't tell you that. It might say that it might be in this period of time. There's nothing to ever say, oh, he's going to do this at this certain point.
And also, nothing tells you that the Doncaster Rovers goalkeeper is going to throw it into the crowd.
I think it comes back to
Wasn't that the game against Crewe?
Yeah, in the playoffs, yeah.
Oh, striking goal.
So about what we said earlier.
It's give, to be fair.
And like controlling what you do. Because if you're like, again on penalties, if you're going to the left every time, and I get that, 100% get that. If you're in a final and you're taking a penalty and you've scored 100% on the left and only like 75% on the right, you're going left. Like that's where you know where to put a penalty. And Alan Shearer has given advice about penalties before, and he said, don't look at anyone, don't think about anything, don't think about the goalkeeper, just put it where you've put it every single time in training.
Tell that to Ivan Toney.
I think that comes from his era where there wasn't a lot of analysis and things done. Mm-hmm. But I still think it does come back to informing and controlling your decision. Yes, you should look at the stats and decide most of the time, but is it going to control what I do, or am I going to go, okay, he has gone that time most times, but you know I can absolutely smash one into that top corner and he stands no chance of getting it, whether he's good on his left or not.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say quickly on the penalties scenarios and stuff like that. Gary Neville and Roy Keane were talking about it, and they said that penalties are not luck like they used to be. They're not 50-50. They're not goalkeeper versus striker in terms of, 50-50, one's going to come out on top. Although in a sense it is, there's so much that goes into it now. There's preparation, there's technique, the striker will be looking to see if there's any patterns that the goalkeeper makes with his diving, whether he likes to stand and wait, whether he likes to dive early, whether he's better diving high, whether he's better diving low, and where they might have the best chance to score. And the goalkeeper will be doing his best to tactically make the right guess in terms of the patterns that the striker seems to put away the penalties, or that the player puts away the penalties. And there's techniques that go behind it as well, that from both points of view, the goalkeeper and the taker, in terms of it's diverted it away from being that cliche that people always used to use of it being potluck and 50-50. It's just diverted away from that no more. Or since then, it's not like that anymore.
That's what Southgate said the other night, and I think he put it very well in an interview. He said, well, I think we've proved that penalties aren't a lottery anymore. And I think that was a very good way of saying that, because he said we've proved it because we've gone and we've done it. Now, I'm just going to, ironically, I've got a statistic which I'm going to share. Since XG, expected goals, has been introduced in the Premier League, the average shot distance has gone down every single season since. So every season since they started analysing how likely you are to score based on where you are on the pitch and the surroundings, every single season, the average distance of a shot has gone down. Now, for me, I go, well, back to the question, is it controlling them or is it guiding them? Because as a coach, as a manager, as a coach, whoever's coaching them is obviously saying, get closer, don't shoot from here. And it's coaching. You're coaching this into players. Now, I think we'll see a lot more about the data in 5-10 years time, when the players have been brought up with the data, because now you're trying to change, you're trying to teach an old dog new tricks, for lack of a better phrase. And so I think now we can't necessarily see it properly, but at the minute we're coaching those longer shots away from people. And I'm not saying we don't take the longer shots, because we do, but statistics show that the average distance of a shot is going down and down and down in the Premier League. Now, is that just everyone trying to play like Man City and pass it into the goal? Or is it a case of we are now coaching this out of people? I think that's a good thought to ask.
How does that correlate to goals scored? Are there more goals scored since then? That'd be interesting.
I think the average conversion rate has actually gone up because people are shooting close to the goal. If you're taking 9 shots from outside the box, the likelihood of you scoring is a lot less than if you're inside the 6-yard box. But I think that's an interesting thing that we're going to have to go get our podcast statisticians to go and look at.
I think
absolutely.
James.
I reckon that will change again in the future, because obviously, like I said, not just you that sees that, everyone sees that. So how long until someone goes, right, most goals are scored inside this area? And they're probably doing it now, they're probably trying things now, and it's just not working. But how do we stop them from getting those areas? How do we prevent goals being scored in those areas? And one of them is potentially, like Italy had in the previous Euros, low block. You sit on a low block and don't let them inside the box. If they've got no one that can shoot from distance, then they're not going to be scoring. And kind of linking back to our question at the start, it's my favourite question to ask. So if whatever club you boys are at, or anyone that's listening, I'd recommend you to ask this question, because it gives you some great answers. So I've asked it between my grassroots club, Watford's Advanced, things like that. And it's, how do you win a football game? And everyone's answer, all
that
the
solved it.
younger players' answers, or even some of like the 14s and 13s before, the older players within the group, you ask them the question and someone will go, pass it, get round people, take people on, dribble. And you're like, well, no, score in that thing and don't let them score in the other thing. That's it. And
It's
I know
a simple game.
it, and it becomes like, and I've had different disputes with players before because they've gone, well, no, it's more than that. It's more than that. And like, well, no, not really. The essence of it is go score in that, because if you score in that, you win the game. And if you don't let them score, and it sounds like such a, is it Kevin Keegan that said that? Score more than they do, we win the game, boys. It's a bit like that, but it is true. And
It's
it's
fundamentally, isn't it? Fundamentally, football is the most simple
It's the
yet the
simplest
most
game,
complex
most
game.
complicated. Yeah.
Yeah, and
To be
and
fair,
that
but-
is it, all it boils back down to is it's so simple. It's so simple, but sometimes we overcomplicate it. But at the same time, in its nature, it is complex, and that's why it's such a beautiful game.
But just
So
like the languages as it is, like it does show that football is an art because it can be interpreted in different ways. Like the best analogy that I can come up with is like language. You can go to different places in the world and you can say different things. What we say now might have been a totally different meaning to what it did 50, 60, 70 years ago.
Go on, Luke, tell us.
Thinking about the way that people use language. But then you say the same with football. We might go, oh, the old 4-4-2's old school. No, it's not old school. It's just another interpretation of the game and a way of doing things. We all have different lifestyles and they can all be interpreted. Some people might go, oh, you know, I like doing this. So some people that might be a bad thing, but for some people they go, oh, actually that's a good thing. So it just shows how much there is an interpretation, and you know, trying to get the perfect formula, no one's ever going to get.
So,
unfortunately, we're not blessed to go right, perfect.
So this is based on what you've just said, Carl. I think this is a book recommendation of mine for anybody listening who is fascinated by football tactics, just like us lot are. Inverting the Pyramid is a history of football tactics, and it is so interesting. And I think it goes back to what Carl just said. It's about how it's changed throughout history. It's all an interpretation, and it's all based on society and the nation. You know, the English way is always attack. We must, and that was not just in football, not just in sport, but we had to invade, we had to go and win, and we had to be aggressive. There was no honour and no merit in defending. And that reflected in the way football was played in this country up until not so long ago. So I think it's a really interesting book to read. I definitely recommend it. If they want to sponsor us, feel free. I'll wrap us up quickly. Oh, go on, Keane.
A quick thing before we finish. I think this has been a brilliant discussion, right? And we've had, we've all got different views, which is brilliant, which is fantastic, because it allows us to come together and have these types of discussions. And stuff like that. If there is like any different types of views on this, then let us know in the comment section. But one quick thing to finish on, it's a quick fire question, right?
Okay.
All I need from you is a number. Scenario: you run a football club, right? You're in charge of absolutely everything. I know it's not realistic, but in charge of absolutely everything. To what extent, taking in every factor, so this might be opposition analysis, in possession, out possession, and stuff like that, your own tactics, how it affects your training sessions, scouting and recruitment, injury prevention, all of that sort of stuff. Out of 100, give me a percentage of which you would let statistics affect your decision making or come into play in terms of how your model of split it. 40.
I'm gonna go.
I was going to say around 40, yeah.
I'm gonna say 65, and mine is not that it's going to control the way I do things, but I think when it comes to things like the physicality side, the data makes more sense for that, and stuff like injury prevention. Because at the end of the day, trying to work out a injury as a manager is, at the end of the day, we're not inside the person's body, or we can't feel the pain that they do.
Hello.
So,
Very
It's
PG.
an interesting way of putting it, Carl.
but we
Good quick
but we
fire
get the chance.
answer.
We're not the
Yeah.
person that is injured. So how are we supposed to know when they're ready to return back to fitness? you know, and that's why the data is so big, and that's what I would have on that side specifically. Yeah, and then I would personally base a lot of my stuff around video analysis, because I feel it's that field that has a lot more of it, but especially more like the sciencey in the like the biomechanics, injury prevention, a bit in recruitment.
What's this, a job interview, Carl?
You're hired.
But we all do get. Hopefully, we all
So
understand.
so
the point I'm-
65, right?
Yeah,
Do I
I
need-
know 65.
All right, so 40 for Luke, 65 for Carl. What are you boys saying? Matt, James, what are you saying?
Well, I'd say putting everything in though. I'd say around 40 to 50. Putting everything in.
Yeah.
I'd say 40 to 50 is a.
I
What are
think
you
I think
saying,
Carl made an excellent point, as that some things need it more than others.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think we discussed that today about the dead ball situations, the recruitment, blah blah blah. But I think I'm looking at a range based on 40 to 60%.
Yeah, I'm slapping straight down in the middle of you. I'm going 50.
50-50. And I will
About
go with
50-50.
one more question, which is very quick fire. It's a one-word answer. Carl, especially you.
Carl,
One word, and it's
Can't go
all
first,
of
I
you.
reckon.
Carl, Matt, Keane, Luke. Do you let data control or inform your decisions?
Inform.
info for now.
Inform.
Inform.
And inform. Perfect. We're in agreement. Well, I think that about wraps us up for today's episode. As promised, we'll always leave you with some sort of thought or quote which is relevant to what we've discussed. And today is an age-old cliche that failing to prepare is preparing to fail. Thank you very much for listening and taking the time. We do appreciate it. We hope you might have learned something or has sparked some debate within your own head. Please feel free to go and share this, and we look forward to you hearing us again in the next episode. Thank you very much. See you later.